Hello, hello, hello. Let's have a look at how we paint up all the main sections of a Thousand Sons Legionnaire, or in this case, the Thousand Dreadnought. So we'll start with field blue from Tamiya, and we will be highlighting all those black robes. Next up, we'll be adding a pinch of Medea Combat White into the mixture, just to give it a lighter grey appearance, which I will be highlighting all the sections that I've sketched out and established with my first layer of field blue. So take into consideration our light source from the top is preferable, and this will give us a really nice graded blend and gradient. The blue will play off very, very well against the red. The slight blue that's already in that grey. Now here's ready to be developed with the brush. Okay, let's go on to the very, very difficult red. Now this is something that has confounded people as long as Forge World have released the scheme for. I found a simple workaround to this. Begin the exercise with a metallic red base coat. In this case I'm using Garnet Alchemy by Scale 75. I'll be laying down 2 to 3 consistent layers across the entirety of the machine. Any area that will be red, and this will give us a much richer foundation to build on top of rather than a pure silver. One thing I have noticed when using the traditional Forge World method is that the armor plates do have a tendency to look very bulbous in nature. Sometimes, unfortunately, we can lose detail, and that wasn't something I was prepared to do with this miniature. I wanted something that was built up in traditional painting methods, something that used very thin, gradual layers to avoid any missteps that may occur with the Forge World technique. When using the Tamiya glazes on top, I did find I ended up with a very, very almost like ruby-like appearance to the armor that didn't quite sit right with the rest of the painting scheme, the painting schemata. And now I'm not sure whether this was intentional or not, because I'm sure that the Thousand Sons have some kind of cantrip, some kind of magic spell that would stop any kind of detritus, any kind of dirt or rust forming on their armor. Next up, I'm using a rather bizarre mix of steel plus gold plus the previous mixture of Garnet Alchemy as my first highlight. I'm breaking up the highlighting scheme with gold because it's slightly warmer, it's metallic, and I've added silver in there to give that false gold impression. The Garnet Alchemy is in there already from the previous section just to help the blend and transition. I'm very keen to retain the luminosity of the armour, especially with the metallic pigments I'm using. The paints I am using are much finer ground than you may have used through. If you are only used to Games Workshop methods, this will be a big eye-opener. The Vallejo Air range and the Model Colour range, as well as Scale 75 metallics, I have found are much, much smoother in gradient and give a much finer finish. Okay, I've added a bit more silver into the solution, and I'm highlighting all the previous sections. Don't be afraid to really push the contrast at this point, to the point where it looks dreadful. It almost looks like a very two-tone appearance, going from the mid-tone reds into a bright sparkling silver. We will be pushing these back with our glaze layer, our filter layer, towards the end. Next up, I'm using purple ink by scale 75. The reason I'm using ink here, not a normal acrylic paint, is that inks are incredibly translucent. They are high density, very low translucency. So we're able to see the underlying metallic colours show through. I'm sketching this into all the shaded areas, anywhere that I believe a shadow would build up. And I'll add 2 to 3 very consistent layers of this. Now, because the metallic paints, you may find you have a bit of trouble with the ink adhering to the surface. Take your time, work in layers, and build up the gradation that way. We do not want that instant transition. Far from it. It's far better to go in very gradual layers to build up the effect we're looking for. For my filter layer, my glaze layer that will bind everything together, I'm using Deep Red by Winsor & Newton ink. Now, a word of caution when using these inks. They have an incredibly slow drying time. I'm talking around a week. So if you are using this, they are excellent, but they do take quite a long time to dry. Even if you varnish them and try and paint it on top, sometimes you will get some bleed through, especially if you add a heavy layer, which we're about to here. So just be cautious here. There are other paints on the market. Have a look at De La Rowney. They offer a very good wide selection of paints, of inks rather I should say, and scale 75 can be mixed up in this manner to create a similar deep red effect. When using the ink, make sure that you still use thinner. This is around 10% thinner to the rest ink. It avoids clogging up the airbrush and it gives us a nice dilution that we're able to spread across the entirety of the miniature. I think this is my 3rd or 4th layer. We keep adding layers until the purple and the bright silver are knocked back and look like a coherent red rather than silver and purple. So that's my pain-free method of how to create a Thousand Sons metallic red scheme. By all means, feel free to add to me a red on the top of this to give it the consistency and the red that you're looking for. Next up, we need to use the oils. In this case, I've used Wilder's Aqualine Black Smoke. This is we can use this in a very similar way that we use oil paints, except that it's water soluble. So I've added this in a previous stage, allowed it to dry for a day. I don't think you even really need that. I think you can use this straight away off the bat. I've used this as a pin wash. Now you can see I'm manipulating the excess off the panels. I'm just using water on my brush. So this opens up a whole world of opportunities for us. If you do not like using oil paints, use these instead. If you don't want to go and buy, admittedly cheap, but if you don't want to buy new specialist brushes for your oil paint experiments, well, there's no need to. You can use an older Winsor & Newton brush or a new Winsor & Newton brush. It's all water soluble. It will not damage your brushes whatsoever. So it's still activatable around a day afterward. I have left this for an entire month, just as an experiment. The video you are seeing here, I began this process a day after applying these paints. I only applied the black, and the rest of the sections, the gold, etc., I haven't done anything to yet. I'll be covering the gold in a separate episode. But I've added a very thick consistency here that I'm removing again with a swab with just pure water. And the best thing about these paints, when you open them up, there's vanilla scent in them. So the gentleman who created them realised that working with oils isn't necessarily the nicest of experiences, even if you are using low odour thinner. This stuff, it smells like chocolate. It's make sure you don't eat any though. I'm not sure how safe it is to consume. I'm guessing not at all. So please don't drink this stuff, no matter how delicious it smells. I'm removing any excess paint in a similar manner that I do with oil paints, only instead of using thinner, I'm using water. Okay, let's finish up the miniature. So once the gold has been painted, the filigree, we need to add some chips. Even though these guys are ethereal in nature, I'm sure that they do keep very good care. They do take care of their equipment very well. You will inevitably end up with a few scuffs here and there. I have used a sponge, the kind of packing that comes in Games Workshop miniatures, in Forge World miniatures, and I've added steel. So that is Vallejo Air Steel to the tip. I have dabbed off any excess paint, and now I'm adding this to the metallic surfaces to both highlight them and give an artificial sense of texture. Instead of edge highlighting everything, substitute that stage for this. Give it a whirl. On the panels, when using this kind of scheme, miniatures, especially large vehicles, they do have the tendency to look quite toyish. I would highly recommend adding an edge highlight of either gold plus steel or pure steel into those areas, just to redefine the hard edges of the miniature and focus our attention on those areas we want to draw the viewer's eye to. And that's it. The no pain, no stress way of creating Thousand Sons red armor. Hope you've enjoyed this. We will be covering the blade in the next lesson, in the next episode rather. I'll catch you then.